Welcome back to R.M.Aviation, everybody. Today we're joined with someone special, Tim Jordan, former airline executive and a long-term industry veteran, someone who's worked right inside the engine room of commercial aviation. Now, he brings a very different view and he's really honest about what he says. And this will bring out a great conversation, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. We'll be pulling back the curtain on what it actually takes to build and run an airline, and also any large-scale complex businesses. Now, it's the kind of stuff that makes or breaks a carrier, and it's the operational realities that never make the headlines. So if you're interested in this, hang around for the rest of the video and you're gonna enjoy it. Now, Tim brings a rare mix of experience, clarity, and insight, and I think you're gonna get a lot out of this. So hang around. Tim, it's great to have you here with us today on RM Aviation.
Pleasure, and it's good to join you, Royce. Yeah, an industry veteran indeed. I've that's something I'm going to have to get used to hearing. But yeah, I guess I guess it's true. I've been around the industry since 1989. Yeah, I guess that makes me a veteran.
Well,
Still not
veteran compared
comfortable
to
with
me.
that word. So.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Tim. Thank you for joining us. So, I guess my first question today for you, Tim, it's about the reality of the industry. So, from your experience, what's the biggest misconception people have about how airlines operate?
Um, I I think there's a bit of a misconception out there that all airlines are the same. Um, and I think from a front of house perspective, there's a huge amount of similarity in terms of how aircraft are operated.
Yeah.
It really doesn't vary very much. Um, I guess it's more back of house in terms of whether it's the commercial functions or the support functions, where airlines do things quite differently to each other. So that misconception, I guess, is all airlines are the same. They do the same things the same way. That, from an operational perspective, probably gets, is pretty correct. However, it's absolutely not the case when it comes to commercial functions, when it comes to support functions that can radically set apart and differentiate airlines. And I think that misconception that all airlines do all of the above the same way is probably the biggest misconception out there.
That's quite interesting. So, where do you think that misconception comes from?
Well, in this particular market, we don't have too many role models. And I think, so there's a default. And I saw this firsthand when I had a wonderful 3.5 years up in the Philippines with Cebu Pacific. Um, I went into an environment whereby there was another reference point. That reference point was called Philippine Airlines, the flag carrier. So what I actually found in this, Cebu Pacific back in, I joined them back in 2005, um, but they had been around for about 9 years as the first low cost carrier, even predating AirAsia up in Asia, and they had essentially started off as a very pure low cost carrier, but they had morphed not because of design, but they had gradually moved towards being, if you like, a Philippine Airlines light version.
Yeah.
And as I say, it's not because that was by design. It was the reference point for people in the Philippine industry was Philippine Airlines. That was the benchmark. So I think based on that experience, the misconception in the industry here is that, well, the default is, of course, Qantas.
Mhm.
So everything is like Qantas and should be like Qantas.
Yeah.
I think it's, as I say, it's not necessarily, it's something which happens because of there aren't too many other reference points in the industry.
Yeah. So, I guess my second question for you today is about building an airline, and I'm sure you'll have a bit of a long thing to talk about with this. But when you're starting an airline from scratch, what's the first thing you have to absolutely get right from day one?
Um, it is the people. It's the people with the right attitude.
Yeah.
Um, It's the people with the can-do attitude. It's a starting any business is a tough environment. You throw on the aviation industry, and it's an even tougher environment. But any new startup is a tough environment. It's tough just getting heard. It's tough making ends meet. It's tough. Every single day is hard work. Um, and getting the right people who are flexible and buy in to the overall mission of what you're trying to accomplish, um, that's critical. Because if you don't get the right people initially, that very quickly just permeates through the rest of the potentially, other people who join maybe don't have the same mindset or
Yeah.
don't have the required mindset to be in a startup environment, to have that can-do attitude, the come on, let's roll our sleeves up and get this done.
Yeah.
It's hard, but we're going to get it done. Um, that starts from the first people who are in the team when you start any business. And I think that, without a doubt, sets the culture.
Mhm.
And it's critical to get right. And you get that wrong, it really hurts you. It's very hard and potentially very costly to put right in the future.
That's very insightful. So, what happens if you get that wrong early on? I know you sort of explained that, but could you go into a bit more depth? Like, what could possibly go wrong if you get that wrong early on?
Well, potentially, what starts as a small problem becomes a bigger problem.
Yeah.
You end up with more people who maybe don't buy into the mission. You have more people who go, oh, you know, this 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 is I'm doing stuff it doesn't say that I should be doing this. In you need flexibility and adaptability in a startup environment. It isn't always going to be 9 to 5. There's going to be things go wrong, and there's times where everyone goes, we have to, we just got to get this sorted now.
Yeah.
We've got to change something. It's going to require people to probably some of the work-life balance
Mm.
isn't great. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's another way of putting it. Sometimes the environment is, especially in an airline environment. We weren't operating well. Towards the end, we were operating red eye services certain days of the week. Um, you don't quite have to be on 24/7, but there are times when it feels like that,
Yeah.
and that will go for any new business. There will be times you don't even kid yourself that you can flip a switch and turn it off. At the end of the day, you may step out of the office, but you're still thinking about it, and that's
Yeah.
quite a tough environment. But in terms of things that can go wrong, if you get the wrong people, it can then what can start as a small problem is likely to grow to a bigger problem, and ultimately your culture will not be the culture that you need to thrive.
That's very interesting. So, what do you think most founders focus on that actually isn't what you should be focusing on from the beginning?
Um, I think things like um, and a few people have to forgive me for this one, but I'm going to say it. Um, the name. There are certain products. If you're putting a product on a shelf
Mm.
in a store, then yes, the name's important. Okay, you've got to create that awareness. When you're filling an obvious hole um, where there is no product, um, the name of the product is not that important.
Yeah.
There are lots of airlines out there that have stood the test of time, that have very questionable names.
Mm.
Ryanair.
Yeah.
Okay, there's probably the best example. Yes, as a flag carrier, yes, flag carriers, they do their stuff on behalf of the country they're representing. But there are lots of other airlines out there whereby you go, gee, I'm sure that didn't take too long sitting with a drink in a pub to actually come up with that particular name. Um, they stand the test of time. They're not that important, and all of the brand people forgive me, okay? Because yeah, I've said that out loud.
Yeah. So my next question for you is about the Australian market specifically. So do you think the Australian market can realistically sustain multiple airlines in the long term, and why or why not?
Yeah, without doubt. It's not even up for debate anymore. Through the one thing that Bonza did prove without doubt is there is demand out there. Um, there is and the reason I can say that without doubt, there was a study by SEO Economics based in Amsterdam in 2017, which looked at the um, brand new airline routes and how they developed and grew 1 year after route launch. They studied more than 5,000 reference points, 5,000 routes, made primarily across Europe, but not wholly. And those 5,000 routes are very neatly plotted on a graph in terms of a best fit line for market growth and demand that's seen 1 year after. If we take the Bonza routes and plot the Bonza routes, which fit the same criteria as those particular markets, um, the lines are inseparable.
Yeah.
Our market growth here in Australia to and from regional centres, whether it's Port Macquarie or Mildura or Bundaberg,
Yeah.
those markets sit squarely, absolutely on the same line as that reference point for 5,000 other markets in the rest of the world. The market demand that regional Australia produced for Bonza was exactly in line with the rest of the world. So there is a market. Yes, of course, people in regional centres drive a bit more, but
Yeah.
it's not because they really want to. They drive because there isn't the access to air service, or the access to air service is prohibitive in terms of cost. If you make the cost the same as, or approximately the same as, accessible to low cost carriers as provided by a low cost carrier, Jetstar, in the capital cities. If you provide that in the regional centres, the proportion of the population you will see travelling will be the same um, as um, as in those capital cities. So there is a market. There's undoubtedly a market. What we need is basically I spent a very long time looking for the right investor. Unfortunately, that investor didn't have the necessary, I guess, legs to go for the duration that we
Yeah.
needed. There is a market there. We know that. We have proven that. And so, absolutely, there is a market in Australia. And I'll just sort of add to that. My experience in Kazakhstan, where I had the pleasure of starting up the first low cost carrier in Central Asia,
Yeah.
that market has a domestic market which is approximately 1/3 of the size of Australia's domestic market in terms of seats in the market. And they actually have three airline groups at this moment. The Philippines, where I was with Cebu, the domestic market is approximately half of the Australian market size. They already have three significant airline groups, independent airline groups. The same could be said for Australia. Australia is the eighth largest market in the world, last time I looked. Um, of the other nine in the top 10, and in fact, I think 14 of the top 15, Australia being the outlier, all of them have at least three major airline groups. Australia is the outlier. There, it is just bizarre. And unfortunately, we accept far too easily the fact that we are in this duopolistic environment whereby 99% of the market is controlled by two carriers. It is bizarre, it is odd, and as I say, it is a very much an outlier when compared to many other similar or even smaller sized markets around the rest of the world.
That's Yeah, I mean, it very much similarly follows what my opinion is on that as well, and that is there is the market. We just need to figure out someone who can do it. So my next question is about the future of aviation in Australia. And my question is, looking ahead in the next 10 to 20 years, what do you see the industry of aviation in Australia looking like? More consolidation or like how do you see it looking?
I think I'd like to be optimistic. Um, I like to be optimistic because yeah, that's where I come from.
Yeah,
I want to see more competition. I want to see this industry grow. That's what I've spent my time in this as a veteran in this industry doing is trying to grow the market.
mm,
Um, whether that's getting people on an aircraft for the first time in the Philippines or in Kazakhstan or elsewhere, or with Virgin Blue many, 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 many years ago.
yeah,
Um, so I'm optimistic. However, if I look back 20 years, what did our market look like 20 years ago? Well, we had Qantas, we had a Virgin Blue at the time, and we had Jetstar,
mm,
and we had Rex turboprop. Unfortunately, in 20 years, we've stood still.
yeah,
So I like to be optimistic,
mm,
um, but it requires, I think, a whole different philosophy with regards to the third airline group. And
yeah,
when I say a different philosophy, you know, I spoke recently at the Senate Committee on Aviation,
yeah,
and um, I think it was news to a lot of people in the room that we have not had um, any Australian investment in mainstream Australian aviation since the turn of this century.
yeah,
There has been no Australian investor step forward. So we've got our share of billionaires around the
yeah,
world and everything else, and um, for whatever reason, they have absolutely shied away from looking at aviation. And that's a big shame because we all pay the cost
yeah,
of that. Now, whether that's for good reason, logic would say, well, it's for a very good reason. Look at the history. Look at
yeah,
Bonza. Look
yeah,
at all that have been before, Tiger Airways, etc. However, at some point, and I believe we're past that point because Bonza has proven this market exists. 5 years ago, when I was knocking on people's doors,
mm,
looking for Australian investment. Some a critique which has been thrown in my direction is, my goodness, why did you work with these people, 777 partners?
yeah,
And the reality is, I spent 12 years looking for Australian investment,
yeah,
knocking on doors, and 777 partners had invested in Flair Airlines in
yeah,
Canada, who were doing something very similar to the plan that we were looking at.
yeah,
And they'd stuck with them through COVID. They'd also bought aircraft. They were into technology businesses and everything else.
mm,
So they actually, stepped forward um, when nobody else would.
yeah,
And as I say, for 12 years, I was knocking on doors. Um, Somebody at some point, I'm hoping, Australian investors will step forward because they realize that the anomaly that the Australian aviation market actually is. It's really, really odd. People like to talk about the grocery sector as being very uncompetitive. Um, well, let's look at the grocery sector versus aviation.
yeah,
Um, if the aviation sector was the grocery sector, Coles would actually be half the size that it is.
mm,
That's Virgin, the equivalent,
yeah,
and Aldi doesn't exist, and neither does IGA.
mm,
So we like to say the grocery sector is very uncompetitive and it's very tough, and it
yeah,
means we all pay more when we go shopping. Um, the reality is, those four, I think, end up consuming about 80 something percent of the grocery market sector. And there's
yeah,
four of them. And here we are in aviation with two airline groups at 99%.
Yeah.
That just, we should be, very unhappy with ourselves as a country, as a nation, about that degree of non-competitiveness in a very fundamentally required a sector
Yeah.
for us as Australians. Um, there isn't enough focus on changing that, and whether that's government assisting, or whether that's just the whole investor mindset
Yeah.
about actually saying, yeah, we can do this, we should be doing this, we need to change this, um, or it's a combination of both. Um, that is significant, and we as a country are unfortunately trailing the rest of the world um, in terms of competitiveness because in this particular sector.
Yeah.
And that's nothing. And just to clarify,
Yeah.
Qantas and Virgin are behaving incredibly rationally.
Yeah.
It's just that there isn't the competitive around an environment around them.
Yeah.
They are being very, very rational businesses. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just being very rational businesses. And the environment that we've created as a country, whether that's Tiger Airways being sold in 2013 for $1 or there or thereabouts to Virgin,
Yeah.
and then subsequently retired, all of those decisions lead us to have an environment that we have today.
Mm.
So, yeah, I'm optimistic about the future, but the history shows us that
Yeah.
we
A
may end
different
up
story.
being exactly where we are unless we take some better decisions and encourage that third airline group. Because if we
Yeah.
do that, the whole industry lifts.
Yeah.
Regional airports get more business. Major airports have more competition. That's more services.
Yeah.
People coming into the industry, they have a greater choice of employers. We
Yeah.
have more engineers to, more people to work for, more people to train with.
Yeah.
Everything is more vibrant. And that impact on the whole industry is positive. Whereas, or alternatively, we can stick with the status quo and nothing much will change.
Yeah.
Sorry, really long winded
No, that's
answer.
fine. That's great. So I'm going to talk about Bonza now, and I know, you'll have a lot to say about this. So take me back to the very beginning. When was the idea for Bonza first envisioned and what came to you? And what was the moment that made it feel real for you?
Um, I think when I was finishing up in the Philippines,
Yeah.
um, and I'd seen with Cebu Pacific, so this was um, late 2008, um, and we'd grown the market on Cebu from about 2 million customers up to 7 million customers in 3 years. Um, we had just basically started getting Filipinos to fly, yeah, getting people to fly for the first time. We were getting people off the ferries, off the buses, and people realized they could afford to fly. And I think I do remember sitting in the Cebu offices
Yeah.
and thinking, my goodness, you know, people where I am near Coffs Harbour, people don't consider flying. People drive, or they stay home. And it was bizarre thinking, a wonderful developing economy like the Philippines was all of a sudden discovering aviation and discovering flying and realizing that people could see their families more than once a year when they caught the ferry. They could actually go home for a weekend or go home for a wedding or a funeral or whatever the event was. They could do that by flying. Um, and sitting there, um, I thought to myself, my goodness, there must be an opportunity to do something similar to this in Australia because, yeah, the airfares, especially for regional centres, were still beyond the reach. They were basically the airfares for some were for somebody and still are for somebody else who's paying the bill. So people travelling for work, people travelling for government, people the one percenters who could afford it. Everybody else was hitting the road. And unfortunately, that's largely the case still today, um, especially unfortunately with what transpired with Bonza.
Yeah.
In terms of yeah, and in terms of your question, when did I believe it? I think it was the date. I think was the 1st of August, 2020, 2022, when the first aircraft actually landed
Yeah.
on the sunny coast runway. It came in from the US, and I was standing with my wife and son next to the runway, and this big, beautiful purple aircraft, Max, come and landed, and that was a fairly surreal moment,
Yeah.
as you can imagine. There was some hairs sticking up on the arm at that moment in time.
That was, yeah, I'm sure it was a bit of a moment to live. Wouldn't be able to live it anytime soon, but it'd be great to
Yes.
experience that one day. So, my next question is about common mistakes within the industry. So, what's one mistake you see a lot of new airline founders or entrepreneurs more broadly make far too often?
I'm not going to critique anybody
Yeah,
based on the fact that Bonza failed.
yeah,
So it would be wrong of me to critique other people
mm,
in terms of things that they get wrong or got wrong.
yeah,
What I can tell you about me
mm,
is I got things wrong every single day,
yeah,
and that to a certain degree, I'm going to say that was okay.
mm,
Because the biggest thing about getting things wrong is you actually acknowledge them and you learn from them
yeah,
and you change them. Um, the worst type of businesses, to you could ever be in
mm,
are those businesses that do not understand, do not accept and acknowledge that they're getting things wrong,
mm,
and then subsequently continue along the same path. Now, I got things wrong every single day.
yeah,
Um, and I tried my best to acknowledge those and change those. Sometimes that takes days, weeks, or months to actually change
yeah,
and correct. You want more information before you make a decision, but being open
mm,
and being adaptable and flexible and understanding nobody's infallible, and all of us every single day likely make mistakes.
yeah,
And I think that's probably the biggest thing for me personally, was yeah, I tried to reduce the number of mistakes, of
yeah,
course, over time, but they still happen. Of course they do, and that's just part of being yeah, trying to do something hard
yeah,
and trying to execute something difficult in the market. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
yeah,
Just learn from those mistakes and ideally learn quickly.
yeah. So, when you're building a business, what's the first principle you personally come back to when things go and get uncertain?
Um, I always try and put myself in the position of the customer.
Yeah,
So if I'm hearing, and it doesn't matter whether it's an airline or a plumber. Um, if you're in a business, do I think what I'm hearing as a customer is reasonable and
yeah,
fair? And I think if you as a business can genuinely say yes as a customer, what I'm hearing um, is fair and reasonable,
yeah,
and I'm okay to hear that as a customer. I think that's generally where I try to go back to always, and whether that's as an employer or an employee, that I think is very important in terms of also setting the right culture as well in an organization.
yeah. So, if someone wants to build an airline, and again, you've been through this process, so you'll know a lot about it, or any large scale business for that matter, what's one piece of advice you would give them?
Um, I think um, I think whatever the business is,
Yeah,
I think do it. The hardest step is always the first one.
mm,
People say it; it's real, it's true. There's a fear. There's a fear of failure. My goodness, I've lived that, and it's painful. Um, but you learn, and what's also true is you learn more through failure than what you do through success.
Mhm.
There's a whole list of things that I wouldn't do again, and there's a whole list of things that I would do again. Um, and you learn a great deal through failure. But if you don't take those first steps and you don't fail at some things along the way, um, you you know you don't learn.
Yeah,
So the most important thing is take those first steps, do it. Um, Ideally, you don't fail
yeah,
everything along the way, but just be open and receptive.
cool. So, what was the moment you realized you wanted to become an entrepreneur or start an airline as you did? And what actually pushed you to take that leap?
Um, I never and still don't consider myself an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I consider myself somebody who's passionate
Mm.
about the aviation industry. I grew up not an aviation enthusiast. In fact, I think I'm an enthusiast for what aviation enables, which is for people to go see friends, family, places, and to do that in a speed or a cost which is reasonable.
Mm.
That's what I'm an enthusiast for.
Mm.
The fact that aircraft are the medium that makes that happen,
Yeah.
that's almost the that's making it happen.
Yeah.
So I think, um, yeah, I don't consider myself an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I consider myself someone who's passionate about a something which I personally have loved to do, which is traveling and experiencing and seeing and doing, and genuinely believe that everybody, no matter where they live on the planet, people should have the same rights to do that
Yeah.
and have the ability to do that at a reasonable cost.
Mm.
And it annoys the heck out of me that we've got, you know, a third of Australia that really can't do that
Yeah.
unless we decide to drive 2 or 3 hours to our capital city airport, or even further than that.
Mm.
Generally, even further than that, and that just seems wrong for a relatively wealthy country like Australia.
Mm.
So I do sort of, that irritates me still.
Yeah.
And so yeah, in terms of, I think having a passion and following through on that is very important.
So, what was the hardest decision you've ever had to make in your business, and how did you approach it?
Um, I think without doubt the events of the 30th of April, 2024, when we went into administration,
Yeah.
um, that that day was, I'll use the word again, shocking. Um, but there is it was, if you don't have aircraft because they've been repossessed, then the course of events is fairly predetermined in
Yeah.
terms of that was something that we had to do. We had to go into voluntary administration, and that process is really quite clear in terms of calling a board meeting and then obviously basically going into administration as a consequence of that board meeting.
Yeah.
So that particular process is fairly clear. It still doesn't make it any easier.
Yeah.
And I think, I use the word numb. It was a fairly numb day, and a shocking day for absolutely everybody involved.
Mm.
When I say everybody involved, I mean customers, of course,
Yeah.
suppliers, and of course the 323 Bonza team members who were horribly impacted by the events of that day.
Yeah. So, my final question for the day or for the interview, and this is very much about the current situation around the world, and that is with the current fuel crisis, what do you believe the long-term and short-term effects will be? And how do you think they will affect low-cost carriers and ultra low-cost carriers worldwide?
Um, this industry is used to shocks.
Yeah,
Um, you know, just this industry, just almost has an expectation. I think we do have an expectation, aviation of we're gonna be at the front of shocks when they happen,
yeah,
just because of the nature of the business that we're in. This is another one. Um, what we can look at is historically
yeah,
um, the impact of those shocks on the industry. And what you will see is low cost carriers, um, because they are generally, they're in fairly elastic markets
yeah,
in terms of the pricing side of things. So they're generally the first impact
yeah,
negatively with the shocks going in,
yeah,
but they're also the quickest to recover coming out.
yeah,
So if you actually look at the shocks which have happened previously, the you yeah, you see a quick impact on low cost carriers, and then you see a very quick recovery by low cost carriers. And I would expect that this will be no different this time around.
yeah. Well, thank you for that. Tim, really appreciate your time today. There's a level of honesty that we've gotten through this conversation that you don't hear very often. And to everyone watching, if you're serious about aviation business or understanding how things are really done and run behind the scenes, this is exactly what we're building here on RM Aviation. Real conversations, real insights, and real people who have actually done it. So if you got value out of this, like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll try and do another video like this soon. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.